There have been lots of UAP crash sites around the world that have been recovered by the Legacy UAP program, with credible witnesses and documents to prove it. Hi, I'm Anomaly Files, and today we will be diving deep into the historical UAP crash in Kingman, Arizona. Let's get into it. The alleged crash recovery of an extraterrestrial craft in Kingman, Arizona. During the spring of 1953 stands out as one of the most credible claims of recovering something out of this world. Usually such claims fall into clear categories, either skeptic or believer. However, the Kingman UFO crash provides compelling arguments for both sides, especially with credible witnesses coming out recently with new documents and high-level officials coming out. According to a chapter written in the book Exposed, Uncovered, and Declassified by fellow author and researcher Nick Redfern, the origins of the apparent UFO crash in Kingman, Arizona can be traced back to 1971. Redfern relays that two young UFO investigators, Jeff Young and Paul Cheatham, were investigating reports of the alleged crash, which included not only the recovery of that craft, but an extraterrestrial body. He would continue that the pair obtained much of their information via a friend of the Young family, Arthur Stancell, who further claimed that he himself had first-hand knowledge of the incident.
What happened after that?
We were put on a bus, which the windows were all completely covered with curtains and, in some cases, black paper taped to the windows. And we're driven for 3 or 4 hours, and we're not sure just where we were going. Several of us tried to guess where we might have been. We, at that time, came to the conclusion it was in the area of Kingman, Arizona. We were told that we had been selected for various technical specialties. And I was told that I was to ask any questions that had to do with dynamic loads and nothing more, and I wouldn't get any answers to any other questions. It looked like two saucers, I would call it, one on top of the other, inverted, probably 25 to 30 feet in diameter.
In terms of something known, what kind of metal would it look like?
Well, it would look like a brushed aluminum. I'm sure it probably wasn't that. I say that because I noticed no scratch marks. And anything that would penetrate into the sand 20 inches that way would certainly have some scratch marks.
No signs of buckling, fracture, or anything?
Not that I could see. I accepted it was probably some United States government vehicle, a highly classified vehicle. In fact, we were told that that's what it was. Interestingly enough, one of the questions I needed to know was what the mass of the vehicle was. Well, I can tell a lot of things from the penetration into the desert sand and so forth, but I needed to know the mass. And they told me that they weren't going to let me know that. They perhaps didn't even know themselves. There was also a tent, which I didn't get to look into, but one fellow whom I did happen to talk with briefly until they told us to stop talking, said that he had seen two bodies inside this tent, two alien-looking bodies. It was brown, leathery skin, had a silver, like a cap on, without a bill.
Like a skull cap?
Yes, like a skull cap.
Stancell seemed on the surface to be a credible witness. He was a World War II veteran who had participated in the D-Day landings and later earned a master's degree in engineering. More significantly for the investigators, during the early 1953 incident, Stancell was stationed at the, quote, ultra-secret Nevada Proving Ground, end quote, a site where numerous atomic bombs were tested, particularly during the spring and summer of that year as part of an Operation Upshot. On the evening of May 21st, 1953, Stancell encountered an event that was far more extraordinary than the nuclear test sites. Remarkably, Stancell reported that the incident was examined by Project Blue Book, the official UFO investigation program active during the 1950s and 1960s. At that time, Stancell was not just a witness, but also a participant in the project. On the night in question, the base commander at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio made an out-of-the-blue phone call to Stancell. He would order him to make his way to Phoenix, Arizona, where he'd be picked up by a waiting military vehicle and taken to the location of a recently crashed vehicle several miles outside Kingman. A vehicle he was told was a top-secret military project. However, when he arrived there, he did not think this was a military project. He had not seen anything like it. He recalled that it was a cross between, quote, a teardrop and a cigar, end quote, and was approximately 12 feet long. We should note that further details were offered years later in 2016 by another UFO investigator, Stancell, who claimed that the object was, quote, metallic, 30 feet wide, and 3.5 feet high, end quote, as well as being, quote, oval-shaped with portholes, end quote. More astonishing, inside the crippled object were the remains of a humanoid occupant, although they were certainly not human. According to Stancell, this humanoid figure was around 4 feet tall, with dark skin and facial features that were unlike a human being. We should highlight the comments of the previously mentioned Stancell, who claimed there were, quote, 2 to 4 4-foot-tall humanoids, quote, inside the craft, end quote, all of which were dead, and were, quote, metallic suits, end quote, and had, quote, large dark eyes, end quote. From there, as Rutherford further relays, the investigations grew old. An article did appear, though, in the 23rd April of 1973 edition of the Middlesex News, an article that caught the attention of the UFO investigator Raymond Fowler. Intrigued by the claims, Fowler himself began investigation of the alleged crash. A weird twist, Fowler would eventually discover that Stancell was employed by the same company he himself worked for, and contacting him was actually very simple. On the afternoon of May 4th, 1973, almost 20 years to the day that the apparent incident occurred, Fowler walked into Stancell's office in order to speak to the witness, further of what he knew of the controversial claims of the downward alien craft and extraterrestrial occupant. Stancell said when the team investigated, looking inside the object, they could see a cabin that was oval in shape and contained several technical screens and advanced devices, as well as 2 swivel-type chairs. Despite being told that the vehicle was a top-secret military craft, once more, he stressed that everything about it was unlike anything he had ever seen before, and he had serious doubts that the object was made on Earth. According to the research of President Dennett, the craft and the occupant was quickly moved to a discrete military facility, either Area 51 in Nevada or to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Further studies of the craft, according to the information volunteered by Stancell, the craft likely struck the ground at around 1,200 miles per hour. Despite this, though it was only damaged in a very minor way, Fowler would discover that Stancell had indeed worked in a variety of positions at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio between 1949 and 1960. And what's more, many of these departments and programs would have indeed dealt with recovered military vehicles, at least officially. In short, despite everything, Fowler appeared to be a credible witness. And when other witnesses began to approach Fowler over the coming years with other accounts, it appeared that Stancell's overall version of the event appeared to be corroborated. Several years later, beginning in the late 1970s, respected UFO researcher and investigator Leonard Stringfield began writing and speaking of the case. The first of these was the annual Mutual UFO Network Symposium in 1978. At the symposium, Stringfield told of an account that had been told by him by a fellow UFO researcher, Charles Wilhelm, who had in turn been told of the account from his father that involved a major delay, who claimed he had been taken to the site of a UFO crash sometime around April of 1953, only a month out of the date offered by Stancell of May 1953. Further resonating with Stancell's account, the location was somewhere in the desert, and Delay had arrived there after being placed on a bus and blindfolded. Delay would describe the downed craft as being largely undamaged, of a metallic material, and across 30 feet. Stringfield would reveal further details of his investigation into the account 2 years later in 1980. According to his account, during the summer of 1977, he was approached by a pilot following a UFO lecture at Lunken Airport in Ohio. The pilot claimed to Stringfield that he had been present at a UFO crash site in Arizona at some point in early 1953, a site somewhere in the desert. What's more is that there were several alien bodies recovered from the craft and taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The description of these alien entities was remarkably similar to that offered by Stancell, in that these were humanoid but with distinct differences. The large eyes and the fact that they were around only 4 feet tall. This anonymous pilot further offered that one of these aliens were alive when the team arrived but died shortly after. Stringfield, now more convinced than ever of the possible credibility of the account, at least the basic details of it, would continue investigating it and new information as the years went by. And by the mid-1990s, had further information to reveal. It was in February 1994 when Stringfield next revealed new significant information regarding the alleged UFO crash at Kingman in 1953. According to the researcher, a source he identified only as JLD had approached him. And what's more is he had knowledge of not just one UFO crash in Arizona in 1953, but 2 of them. However, Stringfield died a short time later. The identity of JLD remained a complete mystery. Several years later, though, another UFO investigator would step forward with apparent new information. Following the death of Stringfield, UFO investigator Don Schmidt came forward with information he had received on the alleged UFO crash at Kingman from a woman by the name of Judy Wolcott. According to what she told Schmidt, in 1965, she received a letter from her husband who, at the time, was serving in Vietnam, and to say the letter concerned her would be an understatement. In it, her husband told her of a bizarre event he had witnessed 12 years previously, in 1953. What's more, the location of the apparent crash was near Kingman in Arizona. Judy would continue that her husband, who was a military officer at the time, and who has also happened to be on duty on the night in question, claimed that an unidentified object had been picked up by the military radar. It had appeared out of nowhere and appeared to be losing altitude at a rapid rate. Then, it simply disappeared from the screen. According to her husband, something otherworldly had crashed somewhere in the desert in Kingman. And what's more, several alien occupants had been recovered from the wreckage. Of more concern to Judy, though, was the intense feeling that her husband that he wouldn't make it from Vietnam alive. Whether it was connected to the information he had relayed in his letter or not, Judy confirmed that her husband did indeed die in Vietnam. Redfern also highlights several developments regarding the Kingman crash of the 2000s. For example, another apparent whistleblower surfaced, Bill Uhouse, who claimed to have worked on several top-secret government projects in Nevada decades previously. On one of these locations, Uhouse claimed was none other than Area 51, as well as working with alien technology from downed alien vehicles. Uhouse also claimed that several alien entities referred to as extraterrestrial biological entities, or EBEs, were also housed at the top secret locations. Even more remarkable, some of these aliens were alive and well, and were even divided into categories for study: small, medium, and gray aliens. To a deal organized by President Eisenhower, he would elaborate before his death in 2009 that a peace act of sorts was signed, something arranged between Eisenhower on behalf of the United States, the United Nations, and the extraterrestrial race concerned. Of course, this would resonate nicely with the assertions that Eisenhower made a deal with an extraterrestrial race in February 1954, less than a year after the alleged Kingman crash, for advanced technology in return for a base to work out of in America, as well as access to the population for experimental purposes, essentially permission to abduct people. Perhaps of particular interest to us here, though, are the claims from Uhouse that one of those projects was the UFO that crashed just outside of Kingman, Arizona in 1953. He would say the same as Stancell, that 4 extraterrestrial occupants were recovered from the wreckage, one from whom initially survived but died a short time later. In the mid-90s, an employee named Dan was employed at various locations, including Las Vegas, where he held cover positions to maintain the appearance of a typical person. He had prior experience in law enforcement in the late 80s. However, the work the audience is most interested in is his employment with the government in 1986. While working as an undergraduate student in Dr. Burt Barrow's laboratory, Dan was approached by 3 men, 2 in Navy uniforms and 1 in a suit. They asked if he was interested in seeing the world, which led to a series of interviews and background investigations. By 1991, Dan was cleared to work at the Groom Lake facility, otherwise known as Area 51, eventually transitioning to the Papoose Mountain facility, an area that allegedly does not exist. Initially, Dan's assignment involved reviewing histopathically slides. After nearly a year of testing, he was allowed to work on slides of unknown origin, leading to his introduction to a working group at the proposed facility. This facility, known as Site 4, was where he spent over a year examining these mysterious slides. He worked under senior biologists, most of whom are now deceased. Eventually, Dan was introduced to Level 45 facility, where he and others examined the subject tied to the slides, The slides were stored in pressurized cells and were reviewed using a completely automated microscope system. Dan's work eventually brought him into contact with an entity known as Jrod. Initially, he was briefed that Jrod was an extraterrestrial from the Zeta Reticuli star system, specifically from Reticulum 4. Over time, Dan realized that Jrod was not just an alien, but an extraterrestrial with complex emotions and intelligence far surpassing his own. The term Jrod was a designation, with 15 indicating their distance from Earth in light years. Jrod was retrieved from a crash near Kingman, Arizona, and was suffering from serious health issues. Jrod was described as being 3.5 feet tall, with a ruddy skin tone and large black eyes. He had 4 thin fingers and large feet compared to his body size. Due to his condition, he was unable to support himself fully and was often hunched over. Despite his advanced intellect, Jrod was deeply depressed and felt like a captive. He communicated telepathically with Dan, projecting images and concepts directly into his mind, which felt like being immersed in virtual reality. Dan was involved in collecting samples from Jrod, despite the pain it caused the entity. These interactions took place in a highly controlled environment, where Dan wore a fully encapsulated suit and underwent rigorous preparation before entering the clean sphere where Jrod was kept in. Communication with Jrod was a delicate process, governed by strict protocols, and required precise coordination between Dan and the other biologists. Through his time working with Jrod, Dan was struck by the entity's vast knowledge, particularly in mathematics, its deep emotional struggles. Despite the challenging circumstances, Jrod was cooperative, showing a willingness to assist even as he suffered, apparently. And now we can get to the good stuff. Where most recently, a couple months ago, a government official, Christopher Mellon, came forward with a text from a government official who knew about the legacy UAP program and talked about the Kingman, Arizona crash. Let's read what it says. Blank and I are making a huge progress into getting to the CR program, otherwise known as Crash Retrieval Program. He plans to meet with you at some point. The blank would be Jrod if they found out what we now know. Blank, 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 45 versus blank. Right now we haven't gone that far back. We're dealing with a recovered UAP that landed in Kingman, Arizona in the 50s. We're vacuuming up info as blank blank gets read in. We now know the management structure and security control systems and ownership of the CR, or Crash Retrieval Program. We also know who recovers landed or crashed UAPs under what authorities. We also know the still highly classified memo by a secretary of the U.S. Air Force in the 1950s is still in effect to maintain the cover on UAPs. We also know the SES-2, who's the Air Force gatekeeper, but it is blank, unfortunately. Hello everyone, thank you for watching this video. I thought this was an interesting video to make just because this has been getting a lot more traction recently just because of what Chris Mellon had posted about speaking to a government official about this legacy UAP program capturing an object in Kingman, Arizona. And it correlates with a lot with what people are saying about it. It is a very interesting case to actually look at. It's not as popular as Roswell, but that's okay. It's getting to be quite popular in the recent weeks, so I thought I'd just post about it. But yeah, if you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and comment anything that you want me to post about. Give me suggestions about the UFO topic in general, and I'm always down for some suggestions. Anyways, that was Anomaly Files, and peace out.